Hey everybody, I'm David Page. Welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. On this episode, one of the youngest chefs ever to win a Michelin star, who's now doing pop-up dinners in surprise locations. You sign up, but don't find out where you're gonna eat until shortly before the meal. Here's my conversation with Chef Donald Young. Donald, how are you? Good to talk with you.
Good to talk with you. Thanks for having me on here. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. We're going to go through your life and career in a minute, but I want to start with the element of your resume that just jumps out. After 11 years cooking professionally, only 11 years, you won a Michelin star. What does that feel like?
It's surreal, no doubt. When we first got the call, it definitely took a minute. Actually, it took several hours for it to even just hit me. It was a life-changing moment.
What did you do to get that level of recognition?
I think there's so many people have the potential to get a Michelin star, right? I was fortunate to be presented a stage to be able to perform on. I'm very fortunate to have taken the reins at Temperance. Our first year, we did not earn the star. And it was a realization, you know what? As great as having a Michelin star would be, what matters are the people coming into our door. They're sitting down, eating the food that we're making, and that's what we focused on. We started focusing primarily on seeing dishes come back, if they were finished or not, or guest feedback. And we started curating to what our clients were saying about dishes, and we curated to their palate. And the year after, we surprised with that Michelin star. So I attribute it to listening to guests and having fun with the menu.
That's fascinating because one of the criticisms of tasting menus, for example, is they're not about the guest's taste. They're about whatever the chef wants to show off with. So if you were making something you loved and guests didn't, did you drop it? Did you change it?
1,000%, without hesitation. I'm not the one paying the bill. I'm cooking for people. Yes, it is going to be sided with what my tastes are, what I prefer, and ingredients and complexions I think go together. If I think the dish is out of this world and I'm not getting the feedback for it, I change it. I change it until I get that feedback.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. How'd you become interested in becoming a chef?
Yeah, it's actually a really weird story. I grew up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, Wakanda, Lakemore, basically. I grew up eating a very limited diet, we'll put it. A lot of chicken nuggets, burgers. I ate like a kid, but I was a very picky eater, and I grew up with very picky eating parents. Sunday dinners were maybe a steak on the grill with corn on the cob, Maybe we do a potato on the grill, but most of the time it was potato flakes out of a box and canned corn, Now
that's typically and derisively Midwestern if you're a East or West Coast foodie.
No, Midwest food's actually great, but Midwest parents were very easygoing on what they would make, for sure. As I don't know exactly at what age. It was probably around 13, 14, more like 15, where my mom started going to a jazzercise class, basically 4 to 5 nights a week. And I was stuck. I wasn't allowed to do anything after school until I made dinner for my little brother, because my older brother had football practice or some sort of sport practice. So I would have to cook all the time. The most extravagant thing I would make is meatloaf with still boxed mashed potatoes and canned vegetables of some sort. But that was kind of the little bit of the start. But I was just making food more as a means to be able to go out and play, right? Around Thanksgiving and Christmas were the times that I got very into cooking with my mom. But that's just saying, we pulled out a knife for the first time for the year, and we pulled out a potato peeler, and we peeled the potatoes, and we diced up the potatoes. And that is all we used a knife for, was to cut up those potatoes. And then we made real mashed potatoes. Right around when I turned 17, my dad worked in the bar and restaurant industry. He was a manager, a GM of a bar and restaurant. Nothing out of this world either. It's burgers, pizza, soups, and all that. He worked with a U.S. Foods rep who used to work at a 5-star restaurant, Le Francais, and they were talking. And it's like, well, what's your kid want to do? He said, no, he's interested in cooking. They're like, well, send him to Roland Liccioni and see if he'll take him and he'll work for free for a day or two a week and see if he likes it. And I went, and I met him. And, at that time, I wore all black, big metal chain. I was a punk-ass little kid. It was a surprise he said yes.
Now you find yourself in a traditional French kitchen, and if anyone's seen The Bear, it's yes, chef, no chef.
Yeah.
How did a punk-ass kid deal with that?
It was very difficult, let alone, let's just start off with, I didn't know how to use a knife. I knew how to dice up a potato, to chunk up a potato, let's put it, to turn into mashed potatoes, right? I was cutting myself left and right. I was getting screamed at all the time. I'll never forget the one time I was pulling a sous vide quail leg out of a bag. And as I was pulling it out and turning, the quail leg broke in half and fell straight to the ground. And the chef was standing there cross-armed, just staring. It was watching everything I did, knowing what was going to happen. I picked a case of parsley after that for the rest of the night. And that was like the first 3 to 4 months. I absolutely hated every moment of being there. I did not love it. I also worked at a Culver's for 2.5 years. I was in high school still. I had a girlfriend that I never got to see anymore.
Culver's, if you're not from the Midwest, is a burger chain, and quite good, actually.
It is, yes. But it was difficult. It was just a lifestyle I wasn't ready to have at that time. And one Saturday, I didn't have it anymore. I didn't feel like being there. And I went up to the chef and I told him, I don't feel good. I'm going to go home. And he was just like, whatever. All right. And I left with the intentions of never coming back again. Left with the intentions of trying to figure out a new career for my life. I told my parents the next night at dinner, and they did not enjoy that, and they guilted me hard to go back. And to my own surprise, I ended up going back a few weeks later with a new mindset and a new mission. And I'm not exactly sure what it was, but something clicked, and I fell in love. The restaurant closed down a month later also then. But I was hooked, and I realized, originally I was like, when I was staging there, I wanted to work at an Italian restaurant because I really loved Italian food at the time. And the Italian restaurants I'm used to seeing are very casual Italian restaurants. I didn't even know how to make pasta. But after everything clicking, I realized French food is what I actually really admire and I love, and the complexity of it. Mind you, I didn't really eat anything. I had a very plain palate still at this point. I'll never forget the time that I took tuna tartare home once, and when I got home, and I had no idea what it was, and my mom asked me what was in that cup. And I was like, it's tuna tartare. And she asked me, she was like, do you know what that is? And I was like, I have no idea. She's like, that's raw fish. And I go, that's gross. And I threw it away. Didn't even try it. And after the closing of that restaurant, I decided if I'm going to do this for a career, I need to learn how to start loving food. And at Culver's, I started putting everything on my burger because I was a ketchup and mustard person only. I started putting that lettuce, tomato, onion on there. Pickles took a minute, but I fell in love with pickles eventually. And then I kind of catered the rest of my high school time to a vocational class in my senior year. And I tried staging at any French restaurants I could. And I found basically kind of like the same gig at another French restaurant for another 6-7 months.
For anyone who doesn't know, staging means providing free labor.
Ended up at a friend of mine that I worked with at La France, who kind of took me under his wing, took me along to open up a restaurant with him. It didn't go well, but I kind of got back into that whole scene with him and a connection with that former chef I worked with before. And I went off to culinary school.
Where did you go to culinary school?
I went to Kendall here in Chicago. Definitely opened a lot of doors. The best thing I took out of it were learning some terms, and I did my internship in France, 6 months in France.
Was that a giant step? Did you see things in France you had not seen before?
Yeah, absolutely. Eventually, when I started going to culinary school, I eventually found myself back with Roland Liccioni. In total, until I got my start, I worked with him all the way through it, basically. So he is 1,000% my mentor and a friend of mine also. I would ask him, because he's from France, and I would ask him, like, what should I expect? What should I plan for? And he would just always say, Monsieur, your eyes, they will open. And that's all he would say. He's like, I can't explain it to you. After going out there, spending 6 months out there, I get it. My eyes are open now, and I can't fully explain it either. It's just the culture, the love for food and everything. It is so much better than it is out here. And being able to experience that, I worked at a very small Michelin star restaurant out there. It was a team of 4 of us, 2 interns, the sous chef and the chef. And that was it in the kitchen. I got a lot of hands-on experience with it.
Where was that?
It was in a small town an hour east of Toulouse. So the town was called Castres, Bistrot de Sèvres. We had I think it was a 8 or 9 course tasting menu that we did, open for lunch and dinner. So it was a very weird schedule. And then the menu was constantly changing. We went to the farmer's market 2 days a week, and we based our menu on what we found at the market.
So you come back to the States, you finish up culinary school, you cycle through a couple of restaurants. And then you get back with your old mentor. Tell me about that.
Roland Liccioni eventually took the reins of Les Nomades, and I immediately dropped everything to go back to work there with him. And I started out at the pastry station, and I slowly worked myself all the way up to chef de cuisine, working every single station, basically, all the way up to it. And I did that for 5.5 years.
And then?
And then I went off to Tempuress. The original co-chef wasn't working out with a friend of mine. Girlfriend and I broke up. I was going through a lot of things in my life, a couple DUIs. I was about to hit rock bottom, and I started to pull myself out. I eventually crashed on my friend's couch, who was the owner of Tempuress, on a whim. Like, there was an apartment that was a couple blocks away. I decided to check it out. And it was the only apartment that actually said yes. And I was only a couple blocks away from my friend and his restaurant, Tempuress. And so constantly coming home from Les Nomades, I would walk by the restaurant. I would see him in there, or I would be having conversations with him during the process of his opening. If he needed a hand for help for prep, I was there to help out. And when push came to shove, I was the most reasonable replacement. And so I jumped in.
As executive chef, or what was your title?
It was an executive co-chef position at first. But after several months, it started to lean into where I was the executive chef, and we kind of made that transition to it just because it made more sense for the roles that we were performing.
And what did you do there? Well, you're in charge of the kitchen now. It's a relatively new restaurant. It's French, I take it. What'd you do?
Actually, it wasn't. It was contemporary American, but both of us working in French restaurants all our career, it leaned French, no doubt. The first year, trying to figure out identity was actually rather difficult. We had such a classic French approach at first, but with some love for modernist ingredients and techniques where both of us were still trying to learn. And then what really helped us find our identity is it was such a small restaurant, and the kitchen was probably... it's the size of a home kitchen, honestly, with a little bit more space. Then we had a basement for some storage. But it was a 20-seat restaurant. The max we could do was 30, 32 people a night. We weren't busy at all. Most of the time we closed Tuesday, Wednesdays because we had no reservations. And then Thursday we had 2 to 6 covers. And Fridays we'd have maybe 20 that night, on Friday, Saturdays. So it wasn't busy. It was very difficult to sustain for the first year. And being such a small team, my friend and I, we were the only 2 chefs of the whole place. And since he was handling the business, I was left alone in the kitchen for 70% of the time.
And what were the dishes you were coming up with that defined the restaurant going forward?
Starting out, I'll never forget this raw scalp dish that we did with a parsley sauce and a little coral tuile. It was nothing fancy, but it was the first dish that we did together. And moving forward, we did a chicken ballantine, or more of actually a guinea hen ballantine with some pickled beets and a little bit of a salad and a brown butter sauce, or chazir sauce, I should say, a little mushroom and brown butter sauce. It was very simple. And after that first chance of the Michelin star, I started to rethink some new approaches to the menu and started getting a little more complex and started trying to think outside of the box. One of the desserts I came up with that I think was a big change and a step in the right direction for us was a chocolate tart dish, where we basically served the dish it was a tart shell only, actually, just sitting in a cloud of coconut foam. And tableside, or also in the middle, there would be an encapsulation of passion fruit sitting in there. It looked like an egg yolk, right? Tableside would actually pour a chocolate custard right into the tart, talk about the tart itself, and through our time of explaining this dish, by the time we were done explaining it, the custard had already set in the tart. So you had a warm tart with a cold encapsulation. So you had this hot cold play, looked like it was in a cloud. It was a big change for us, something different. And we started to kind of try and manage the dishes in that sense, going in that direction. One of them we did is a omelet with fiend herbs done in 4 different ways. One of them was like a dehydrated oil. One of them was a chip made in the microwave. I can't even fully think of all the rest of them after that, But we started to try and play around more, and we started to focus on the techniques, if you will, as well, making it more fun.
Such as?
Like the omelet itself, the technique behind it was, it's something that's very different out there. I hate using that word different and no one's seen it before, let's say, but this omelet was baked in the oven. It was treated more like a custard than anything else. And you could pull it out of a pan and roll it like it was sushi, but it had such a velvety texture from it all. So it all seemed one solid cohesive bite when you're actually eating it. And then after that, we started to, because it was such a small kitchen and we didn't have a whole lot of covers before the star, we got into fermentation and preservation techniques. So we started making vinegars. We started any scraps we could, we would ferment it and try and use that juice to power ingredients after that. And then I think one of the dishes that ended up really changing what temperance was about, and the meaning of temperance in Latin is the passage of time, and trying to full utilization of dishes. One of the dishes that really changed everything and created a story for my identity, the temperance identity, and us as a whole, was a dish, as I mentioned earlier, when I was cooking for my little brother. I used to make a meatloaf dish all the time, and I decided to bring that back. So I did a rabbit meatloaf that was covered with a potato espuma. And the big part of it all is we would go tableside with a tin can with pickled corn and serve that tableside. So to show how all my vegetables came from a can and give you that full representation of that right to the core of it all. And that was one of our biggest changing dishes that really became an instant hit, and the direction we changed all the dishes to after that. Something that provided identity to us.
You win a Michelin star. You're
Yep.
seemingly creatively fulfilled. Restaurant business can be tough. Why'd you move on?
As great as that star was, it put a lot of pressure on my friend and I, actually. Even before the star, it was a little bit of those things were actually deteriorating. There were countless nights that we were there till 4 or 5 in the morning just prepping, because since we don't have a team to prep all this up, and Tuesday to Thursday you don't have any reservations, and so Friday, Saturday you're prepping it all overnight, right? It became a big challenge, and if someone wasn't pulling their weight, it showed, and that meant someone else had to pick up the weight, and it was me that picked up that weight in the kitchen. So it made things tough on us, and that star just pushed that more to the limit. Fortunately, we had hired an additional hand because things were getting a little strenuous between us, and it seemed the perfectly logical thing to do, that since we could manage it. And then we were very picky after the star of who we hired. We were only going to hire one person, and we actually eventually settled on 2 people. So we started to angle the restaurant towards a direction where both of us could actually step out and let the ship steer its own course.
Did the friendship survive?
Yes, it did. But it was several years, actually, of where we didn't talk.
That's such a common story in the high-pressure world of restaurants.
It is.
Okay, so you moved on. You worked at a couple of other places. How'd you get to Duxelles?
The restaurant after Temperance was Woodwind. And we had a pretty rough opening where it was a very odd location. And I don't think the marketing was done very well on top of it. We opened in October of 2019. And then obviously February, March of 2020, everyone's inside. Everyone's, stay at home now. So, a few months off because of that. I got furloughed. Eventually in July, I was brought back because the restrictions were lowered a little bit. I got brought back to open the restaurant back up for 2 weeks. And then they cut me out. And through this family that I was starting to get close with, they followed me from Temperance to there. I reached out to them because they were supposed to come that Friday. Told them that, I'm not going to be here this Friday. I've been let go. And I'm not telling you not to come in, but I'm just telling you that I'm not going to be there and I can't guarantee the food anymore, right? And so they immediately canceled their reservation and booked somewhere else that I recommended to them. And during that dinner, they were talking with their friends and they're like, wouldn't it be so great if Don just came to our house and cooked dinner? And that was the start of Duxelles, actually.
So Duxelles, what's the name mean?
Technically, I did start Salted Duck back in 2016 before I jumped with Temperance, because when my friend Sam started Temperance, I thought to myself, I've worked 5 years longer than him, and he's opening a restaurant right now. And I thought that was crazy. And I was a little embarrassed that I hadn't made it past where I was. So I decided to start a pop-up series then. I called it Salted Duck. I only did 2 dinners, and they were horribly done. It was a huge learning curve for me, but it was what it was. And I called it Salted Duck because when I originally created my Instagram handle, Donald Duck Confit, I wanted to stay true to the fun play on words, and I bought this random poster from Amazon, and it was a molecule of salt and pepper. And I thought, wouldn't it be so cool to keep to this modern meets classical idea? And if the image of what duck cell is the molecule, the body of the duck is a molecule of salt, right? A nice perfect square, the perfect NaCl, right? And then out of it is growing the organic wings, the head, and the feet. Modern meets classical, right? You have the classical components of a duck, but the modernization of the salt, right? So salted duck was born. Fast forward to 2020, through refinement and kind of a little fun play on words, if anyone hasn't caught it yet, duck cell still relatively being the same, right? Salted duck, duck cell, the same thing. But it's also a fun play on a French mushroom dish. Duck cell, spelled completely differently, but it's pronounced exactly the same. And thus, we started going with duck cell. And because of Woodwind, I used to do dry-aged ducks, and it was a huge hit. The family that pulled me out to do private dinners paid for me to do dry-aged ducks for them on the side. And I had all the equipment at home to start doing. It wasn't much equipment, but it was still something that I started doing at home all the time.
Come down to my basement, I'm drying a bunch of ducks?
Basically. I mean, it was in a small apartment bedroom, but you know. During my time between Tempers and Woodwind, I was just messing around with some dishes. I was making myself some tacos. And I made a pineapple mezcal relish that was very delicious. But I was also taking like the pieces after that of what I didn't use. And I was grilling it on the stove, and I forgot about it, and I burned it. And I was like, you know what? Let's just try it. Whatever, right? Some charred things are actually still really good, right? And it turned out to be amazing. And so the dish that we did at Woodwind was a whole dry-aged duck with a taco set, right? So we had tortillas, we had a charred pineapple mole, then the pineapple mezcal relish, and some limes and some nice herbs. People loved it. It was an instant hit. It's unfortunate we only sold like 9 ducks a week, but it was still, everyone talked about that dish when we did sell it. And then the family had me do that for them afterwards. And then when I did Vent 2, I decided the dry-aged duck is a hit, right? So we did the dry-aged ducks at Vent 2. It took up a whole entire side of a walk-in cooler, and we could never keep up on them, how fast we were selling them. I think we had at one point 140 ducks. We couldn't even keep them for 2 weeks.
I know what dry aging does to beef. It adds a funkiness that, depending upon the age, can border on the taste of blue cheese. What does dry aging do to a duck?
So along the same principles of when you're aging anything for any capacity, right? You know, yes, we've all heard of dry aging beef. A lot of people have never heard that of wet aging. So beef is, no matter what, always aged, whether we wet age it in a package before it's served to you or it's dry aged in a cooler, right? One loses more than the other, obviously. So the dry aging process in itself actually is a naturalized tenderizer. So enzymes are breaking down these muscle strands that are very long, right? But when they cut it in half, you have a shorter strand, and cut it in half again, shorter and shorter, right?
Well, it's kind of controlled rotting, isn't it?
100%. I mean, exactly that. Yep. So with the controlled rotting in itself, right, we're making it more tender. We are obviously introducing a bacteria to it that ends up, if it's controlled right and properly, can be very tasty. So yes, we are adding a funk to the duck, but it's not that extreme to it. And then the other crucial part to it is, during this process, the fat's also starting to get dry. The skin itself is getting dry on the outside, and the fat is slowly starting to denature itself as well. So through that, when you roast it that way, you actually get a crispier skin without having to, let's say, render it down, slash the skin up or whatever, what have you, you know? It's easier to actually get the crispy skin that everyone's looking for.
So you start doing pop-ups, and then it sounds like, I mean, I'd love to have a Michelin-starred chef come to my house and cook for me. How did you come up with that under the Duck Cell name?
Towards the end of my time at Vent 2, my end date was December 3rd or something like that. And it is the worst time to not have a job in this industry. Everyone's already hired up for December, and then you're going to go into the slowest part of the year and no one's hiring. Plus, on top of that, I had a non-compete I had to deal with. It wasn't a long one. So for a means to an end at the time, it was, you know, I'll restart Duck Cell. And I was busy for December. And through that, I did it was like a cocktail hour for a friend on his birthday at an event space. And the owners of the event space talked to me afterwards. One of them took me out to get coffee a few days later and suggested that I do pop-up dinners at their space. And I decided to give it a go. So I launched my first few pop-ups in April, and they went wildly well. And then the month after that, it was very low. We only had 4 reservations on the Fridays. And on top of that, I can only do Fridays at this event space. So obviously it'd be much easier if I could just do a Friday, Saturday consecutively. So those next dinners, I decided to put them at my dining room table instead. It just made more sense to do it that way. And because of the intimacy of like a more feel of it, it brought it back to being like a private dinner, except a private dinner with strangers, right? You give them like a little cocktail to start out with, and everyone gets a little loose, and everyone's coming over one thing, right? They're coming over there for their love for food and wine, right? And it was an instant hit. So we decided to focus in on that more, and we decided to push the idea of the traveling spaces. So you're not going to know where you're going to be until 24 to 48 hours in advance. It could be at an apartment. It could be at an event space. It could be in a store. You have no idea where it's going to be until then. You have a general idea of a zip code where you'll be, so you can at least get drinks nearby or plan out the rest of your night afterwards. But that's all we leave for you. And then to that shock is like when people are walking into these things, they're already it's already set a different cadence to the whole experience, And it's always how I feel about any restaurant experience. It's about the whole experience then rather than just the food or the service. I do appreciate more service over the food, no doubt. Your experience can be ruined from the second you walked into the door and the host is rude to you. All of a sudden your dishes it's like the half glass is half full, half empty, right? All of a sudden your dish is like, yeah, this dish was just okay. Instead of like, it was pretty good. Could have been better, but so you just have that different mindset. So we set up people to be in a positive manner before they even walk through this door. And then we keep it going until they sit down and start eating the food. And that's what we started to focus on with Duxelle.
Okay, now you were doing an event space or an apartment. When did it, or how did it, or why did it become you go to someone's house?
Yeah, I mean, we still do those private dinners in people's homes. It's nothing we've ever dropped. It's just not what we focus on as much anymore. But we've taken a lot of the dynamic of what makes it fun and interesting. We always make sure it's part of the pop-up. So we always deck out the bathroom. We leave you mints in there and toothpicks and all that. Any of those little things you find in a Michelin star bathroom, right? We'll even hide a giant duck in the bathtub or in a random place in wherever we are. We hang up a bunch of art, and then it's just part of the whole experience. We put people at a communal table. It's taking people out of their element. And like I said, as I mentioned a little bit ago, like everyone's coming over together for one thing in common. It's food and wine. So after a couple drinks, or whatnot, or a couple dishes, people are opening up to each other. I've heard of a couple that met at my dinner and are now dating together. They both had different significant others at the time. They broke up and ended up at a friend of mine's pop-up and mentioned they met at Duxelle. People are making friends from these.
Well, that's the whole communal element of dining in the first place. But let me get this straight. Is it mostly scheduled pop-ups? Is it mostly going to people's homes? What is the business these days?
Mostly we're hosting the pop-ups in a secret location. 24 to 48 hours in advance of where the exact location is.
How many people attend one of these?
We can do a max of 20 per seating.
How's biz?
Business is great. We're basically sold out every Friday, Saturday that we open up. It's been wild.
Obviously, these meals are more than just duck, and I don't mean to minimize the wonderfulness of duck, but what's the food you're serving?
Actually, 70% of the menu has duck in it now, including a dessert. That has been the ultimate fun of it, is like how else can we incorporate duck into the menu, right?
Well, how? Give me examples.
One of the first few courses, we do have a duck prosciutto in a spring roll that goes with a kombuchime cured scallop. We do a fun dish. It's actually one of my favorite dishes right now. We do a little play on takoyaki that we call kwakoyaki. And I make, with my leftover duck legs, I make a duck hot dog out of it. And we use the hot dog in place of octopus with it, right? One of our known dishes, I would say this is probably my biggest signature dish that won't ever come off the menu, is a duck and waffles dish. So we do a liege waffle that's enriched with duck fat. The duck leg confit are tempura fried, finished with a little bit of Roselle Nuit, and then a maple ice cream Dippin' Dots are finished right before the dish goes out. So you got that sweet, savory, hot, cold, fun play on that dish, right? And it's approachable, right? Like people are so used to chicken and waffles, and that's where we kind of stay. We stay a little bit approachable and not like trying to give you, I don't want to just throw names of restaurants out, but we're not trying to like make it seem different than what it really is, right? We have a little fun with it. We stretch it just a little bit, but we keep it very approachable so anyone can come in and feel right at home still with it. And then our dry-aged duck with a chestnut sauce and a honey glaze.
Where do you get the ducks?
So they are from Newark, New Jersey. I'm trying to change my source of ducks. Yeah. It's actually crazy that since I've been in the process of trying to change my ducks, there aren't many duck farms around here in the Chicagoland area. And I've reached out to a couple of farms to see if they'd be willing to partner up and try and start something together, just because some of these farms are in between four major cities of Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, and Rockford. So all four of those cities can be fed by these ducks. And there's no great farm that's doing ducks here. It's becoming difficult. Ducks have actually increased a lot in price, which is also part of why I try to use as much of the duck now as I can.
Your other ingredients, apparently you do what you can to use Midwestern product?
Yeah, so I work with several local farms still. The vegetables and fruits that we get are as much as we can be local as possible to make it as best as we can.
Do you see a brick and mortar in your future?
One day. I just don't know when that one day is. Just because I'm sustaining pretty well. I'm not saying I'm rolling in money over here, but I have a life now. It's more than just work. And I don't know, the more I keep doing this, the more I'm getting comfortable with it. And the more my girlfriend really appreciates it too. So if I open that brick and mortar, I'm going to be back to 80 to 100 hours a week again. And I don't know if I want to do that. The idea is there, and I'm trying to figure out the concept on how it works for me and how do I keep the charm of what Duxelle is. I've joked around trying to see if I can zone a penthouse, and then I live at that penthouse, and then I have the restaurant right there, and we only open 3 days a week, and we can turn it into a private event space on the other days, So it's less work for everyone.
What do you think of the state of food in America right now?
Whew, that's a hard question. I think we're in a huge transition right now. We did just go through that huge boom of the farm to table, and that'll never go away. In fact, that'll only come in stronger as we keep going on, especially with the rising costs of food, the transportation of food across state lines to country lines to continents. That's all going up in price. So it's very hard to have affordable and accessible food now. Fine dining itself has been going away. And it makes me think about Duxelle and the way right now we can easily pivot that we keep a fine dining sense, but by any means, we're not entirely fine dining, if you will, right? I think everyone's been aiming towards a more upscale casual to be able to do mass amounts of people so that way they can actually afford bills. I don't know when Duxelle goes brick and mortar, how we'll be able to pay all the little things that some people don't even realize you have to pay for, right? We'll have to pay for a POS system. We'll have to pay for bigger insurance. The bills will be higher. So food itself has become more casual, more simplified in a sense, and a lot more local.
Do you think America is really into organic or natural, a term that has no meaning? And to extend that farther, are we going to stop eating meat? Are we all going to be eating Impossible burgers?
I don't think so. It comes back to this, that no one's growing ducks nearby. And I think ducks in a sense are starting to become a popular ingredient that you can compare it to beef and chicken. Obviously, being in the Midwest, fish is very difficult to come by. Obviously, we can still get it, but it's not as great as it could be on LA or New York, right?
Unless it's walleye.
Yeah. But even then, getting fresh walleye is nearly impossible here. And I don't know why. It's just people catch it and they freeze it right away, But
it tastes like cardboard, so what's the point?
I don't know. I guess it's a nostalgic taste for me because that was the first fish I ever enjoyed eating.
Well, I lived in Minnesota where it's a way of life, and I never quite got it, but that's okay.
I don't think meat will go away in itself. I think the whole mass production itself might start steering away just because of all the diseases that these animals get.
What's the next great dish you're working on?
I'm doing a fun play on a steak frite dish right now. I actually just got it in the mail today. I'm going to be doing sonicated French fries.
What?
Yeah. So sonicator is a ultra frequent sound bath, basically. So what it does to the potato is it violently shakes it at such a high frequency that it actually creates a lot more crevices and nooks and crannies, basically, of the potato on a microscopic level. And when you fry that, you're left with more edges to get crispy, right? So you get a crispier fry. It's a very modernist cuisine technique that I remember reading in the book 7 years ago, and I've never tried it. So I'm going to work on it, and we'll see how it goes. But I might just lean into a battered French fry afterwards. So That's one dish I'm working on, and a duck egg pasta.
Duck egg pasta. Ooh.
Duck egg pasta, yeah.
Is that richer than a chicken egg? Is it?
It definitely has a lot more iron flavor to it, so it's a little stronger in taste. But yeah, we'll do it like a duck egg carbonara. So duck egg pasta with a duck egg carbonara sauce.
Lovely. Don, you're terrific to talk with, and you're doing some terrific things.
Thank you.
Best of luck going forward, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to chat as well. I really appreciate being here.
Next time I'm in Chicago, send me the pop-up schedule.
Yeah, let me know.
Donald Young on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time.